So this is part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel being broadcast on the internet under the banner of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions. This one is timed at 04:50 GMT, Friday, 20th of January 2023, but this is coming on the stream a few minutes earlier than the stated time at 4:50, just before 4:50 hours GMT. So, among the updates that we shall be talking about are included the comments that have been made about the possible reasons why Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand decided to resign as the Prime Minister not later than the 7th of February 2023. One of the things that has been said about her, obviously coming from people who didn't like her policies, has been that she has been authoritarian and that her COVID policies were wrong, especially the comment that has been echoed by the stupid Sky press preview panelist called Carol Moron. Carol Moron is one of the worst informed and the worst schooled or worst educated participants to be given a platform by any so-called mainstream television channel. She has been given a spot on channel Sky News for many, many years, despite the fact that none of the things that she says resonates with the actual evidence that can be tested and checked on the ground and in the course of the time that follows any comment that she makes. For example, in the edition that we are referring to on the Thursday, 19th of January 2023, Carol Moron supported all the things that have been criticized about Rishi Sunak's behavior. For example, he's not wearing a seatbelt, he's being filmed in a car giving an interview. In a moving car, he was giving an interview without wearing a seatbelt. And the fact that he again has been seen as flying by aeroplane within domestic distance within the United Kingdom, within England. And of course, she has supported unconditionally the British backing of the Ukrainian kind of war efforts and other things. And she's like a version of one of the versions of the criminals like Jeremy Clarkson or Pierce Moore. So she was there and she actually tried to interrupt the other person appearing from Liverpool who was totally expressing totally opposite views to her. And the views that he expressed included the view that the slogan, leveling up, was a false slogan invented by the Conservatives in order to cover up their actual denial of necessary funding for the regions in the north of England. And he said that since the leveling up announcement, or the announcement of the agenda, whether it was called leveling up or not in the beginning, the actual funding by the Westminster based UK Conservatives, the actual funding has gone down, and that the transport system in the north is completely decaying and unreliable. Now, we add on the question of transport that the funding of £100 billion being spent for HS2 is a grotesque abuse of funding, and that should be used to repair the broken down transport system in the north of England, including in the Merseyside area. We argued the same way more than 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 14 years ago, at the height of our opposition to the Crossrail propaganda in London. Because the propagandists said that once running, Crossrail would miraculously transform the transport experience of London people. Well, transport has not been miraculously transformed at all. It is now running for a few months. It's called Elizabeth Line, but it was called Crossrail, and it was built as Crossrail, and it was named by the corrupt evilness called Boris Johnson, who wanted to ingratiate himself, dishonestly ingratiate himself to the late Brenda, the Queen Elizabeth II. Now, there is no count. It cannot be counted during a live program like this because it will take a lot of research. But there is no counting how many things have been called, named after Elizabeth. It is absolutely numerous and unnecessary. But the fact that the evilness called Boris Johnson decided to change the name from Crossrail to Elizabeth was a dishonesty on several levels. Two levels, let's focus on. One was to use the predisposition of the Little Englanders mentality possessing people to automatically support anything that has got Elizabeth's name. So they were trying to get popular, very low level populist support for the idea of the Crossrail line by giving it a kind of royal stamp, Elizabeth line. And the other, of course, was to get Johnson enlisted by the royals as one of the most loyal royal followers and supporters. Now, as any student of the utterances of the Johnsons, like his father Stanley and his sister Rachel, will know there is nothing that Boris Johnson actually cares about except his own career, his own interests. And the fact that he's allowed to do that is a commentary on the fact that England, which controls the rest of the United Kingdom in all the issues that matter, is dysfunctional. It's an evil state. England as a state, that is to say the United Kingdom, is an evil state or in the hands of the evilness. I mean, the decision by the Cornwall constituency MP called George Injustice Eustace not to stand at the next election, whenever the next election is called. That decision has not been reported by the media in the context of the evilness, Eustace running Throughout his time at the DEFRA Evilness Department, running a campaign of evil, conspiracy, demonization against the most innocent baby angel Geronimo. Even the outlets like the Sun and others that reported partially during 2021, they have failed to comment on real, the real dysfunction and unfitness for purpose and the dishonesty and the personification of evil that the midget George Eustace has been. And this takes us to the Times newspaper of Thursday, the London Times of Thursday, the 19th of January 2023, which carries under the comment section a column by David Aranovich. Aranovich used to be a so-called communist when he was setting up as a politico in the late 1970s or early 1980s as the secretary of the UK National Union of Students, a communist. Now, a communist ended up working for the Fox News controller, Dirty Rupert Murdoch, Dirty Digger Rupert Murdoch. That tells the story in itself. Now, his piece on the Thursday column is about the betrayal, letting down of the victims of crime and various other wrongful behavior of the service providers, care providers, etc., etc. And his heading in the column or to the column is Cinderella Service. The Cinderella, the use of the word Cinderella in that context shows that the so-called communist is in his mentality the opposite of communists, or at least the opposite of stated morality and moral stance and standard of a communist. Cinderella is a pejorative, insulting, demeaning word based on cinders, were the most neglected and more deprived and more kind of understated and underrated member of the group or a family was condemned to live. And when they would emerge from the cinders, they would always look dirty and unwashed and unclean. So any use of the word Cinderella is a continuation of the association of dirty, filthy, whatever, as if it is the fault of the victim. Now, if that is the case, then that heading is completely doubly stupid and idiotic. Carried in the Times, the so called newspaper of record. Because what Aronovich is saying there is that, the disclosures of the crimes of David Carrick, the Metropolitan Policeman, serial rapist, who serially raped women for over 20 years, and others. So Aranovich is discussing allegedly the various kind of agencies and auditors or regulators, whatever, part of regulators, and he's saying that they're all failing. But we say exclusively that they're not failing only recently, they have not started failing only in the last week to coincide with the disclosures about David Carrick's crimes. These regulators don't exist. That is to say, the various regulators and various voluntary organizations in the United Kingdom that are patronized by the state are actually in place and are continuing to be funded because they are failures. Because the equation is that the majority of the people who are in need of service, in need of care, in need of protection, these are in the context of the class based control of power in this country. Most of the people who are vulnerable, who are poor, who are in need of support and care, are in the so called working class or the poor class, which is why there is no outcry. There is really no outcry, and the absence of outcry is evident in the fact. According to the admission in the police street newspapers now, that the police, the Metropolitan Police, and that includes the Crown Prosecution Service or the CPS, were made aware of David Carrick's serial criminality and crimes on at least 9 separate occasions. And the Metropolitan Police internally and the Crown Prosecution Service externally failed to take action. Well, they kept failing to take action, and he kept committing the crimes. Now, we extrapolate that, that is, apply the same principle or the same method to the behavior of the regulators. For example, the various stages of regulators, so called, who are supposedly in place and funded by the central government, regulate the police behavior. They have not been regulating the police. And in a piece by Jason Farrell, carried by Sky News during the evening of Thursday, the 19th of January 2023, and in a package which had a piece by Martin Brandt, who is a crime correspondent on Sky News. There were references to more than one incident, more than one individual police. And the sum total of those references meant that even the police personnel who were supposedly investigating the allegations of sexual abuse and rape and whatever began to sexually harass and proposition this same victim. And one of the chief inspectors has been now revealed as another one. And another police inspector or policeman with some rank, according to Martin Brandt's report, was found dead when the police arrived in his home, at his home in Buckinghamshire, the Metropolitan Police. So what David Aronovich is saying is inaccurate and also a tip of the iceberg. Because in Tower Hamlets, for example, to take an example, Tower Hamlets in London's East End, which is called East End, but it is next to the City of London. In Tower Hamlets, the police, in effect, the police don't police. That is to say, they don't do the kind of follow-up to reports about crimes and criminality. Across Tower Hamlets, which is not the biggest borough in London, but it is a borough that contains the largest number proportionately of Bangladeshi origin people, as viewers of this program would know. It contains Brick Lane, it contains Bethnal Green and Bow, it contains Shadwell, it contains Limehouse, and all these places have got significant number of Bangladeshi families and Bangladeshi individuals and Bangladeshi origin born young persons. A very large number of the Bangladeshi origin born young persons, mainly man or male ones, as observed, physically observed, are engaged in daily criminal activities. These are not crimes like the multi-million pound crimes. These are crimes committed by petty minded individuals, but the criminal perpetration of the crimes actually make life of the ordinary people in the estates, in the neighborhoods, unbearable. But the police, Metropolitan Police, totally ignored that. The only time the Metropolitan Police in our hamlets take any notice of any criminal behavior, gang behavior by these gangsters, is when the complainant is a white person. If the complainant is like me, not white person, but a person of Asian background or African background, but is caused detriment, obstruction, obstacles by the gangs of criminals in any of the estates, then the police not only fail to take action, but they look for ways to find excuses to make allegations against me, for example. For example, in the last decade, say between 2001 to 2007 or 8, gangs of gangs of criminal youngsters from the Oaklands school in Bethnal Green would end up occupying the stairs in a building called Nelson Gardens. And faxes were sent to the school reporting to the head teacher that this was going on and this was making it impossible for people to live in there. The police arrived and they accused the complainant of doing something wrong, and they threatened the complainant with arrest if they didn't stop making complaints. That is what actually happened in 2007 in relation to the Nelson Gardens and the Oakland School in Bethnal Green, off the Bethnal Green Road, near the Bethnal Green Road. So if you multiply that interaction and cover, say, 40 incidents or 50 incidents or 100 incidents over a period of few months, you can see that the police were not only failing to protect the victims of crimes, but were joining the criminals in attacking the victims of the crime. You go then over to Rochdale, Barnsley, and other parts of Yorkshire, where the mainly Pakistani origin gangs of criminals were identified in a series of reports and series of incidents as having been involved in systematically sexually abusing mainly white girls. Now, during those years that the criminals were doing that, the police didn't cease to exist. The police were there, drawing the salaries and making their general appearances available, as were the local councillors, as were the local MPs. So, how is it and how was it that these gangs of criminals, mainly identified as Pakistani origin, even if they were identified as of any other origin, How was it that they could do that, what they did? So you multiply that and you extrapolate that and you use the common denominator applicable to those, to the behavior of the Bangladeshi origin criminals actively being allowed by the police, Metropolitan Police in Tower Hamlets, to not only carry on the criminality but also to feel confident in continuing the criminality because the police were attacking the targets of crimes in Tower Hamlets. So if you look at the newspaper coverage, the media coverage of the Yorkshire Pakistani born criminal gangs that were grooming and sexually exploiting, raping mainly white girls, not exclusively white girls, but mainly numerically the white girls. You cannot find, you cannot find any factor being acknowledged by the mainstream media or even by the local papers or the local news outlets acknowledging, they didn't acknowledge, they haven't acknowledged the role of the police in those crimes, the role of the local councils, the role of the local councillors in those crimes, the role of the local MPs. Most of the local MPs in those areas, of course, were Labour Party MPs, not all of them, but absolutely the majority of them. They never did anything. So the report that has been highly overrated and published in the Times about those gangs also failed to address the impact of the same criminal gangs or similar criminal gangs on their so-called similar ethnicity backgrounded ordinary people, absolutely law abiding, absolute majority law abiding, and in the context of the current vocabulary, cost of living crisis, which is poverty and deprivation. Most of the people in Yorkshire, most of the people in Tower Hamlets, we're talking about the Bangladeshis now, remember? Most of the people in Tower Hamlets and in Newham, for example, still exist in circumstances that are really deprived. And despite the fact that there have been, for demographic reasons, people that are on the council, Tower Hamlets Council, for example, who are also of the same background, similar backgrounds, at least in terms of background, in terms of coming from Bangladesh, coming from Silot. They may individually vary in terms of ethics and morality, but essentially the majority, the overwhelming majority of the people on the council are from the same kind of areas in Tower Hamlets. They come from the same areas in Silot, in Bangladesh. There is no record. There is absolutely no record on Tower Hamlets Council's published archives or in the minutes of the council. No records. No recognition by Tower Hamlets Council of the behavior of the criminal gangs that are mainly Bangladeshi origin born in the UK, but born to parents of Bangladeshi background. There is absolutely no evidence. So you take it to Shamima Begum, who is Bangladeshi origin, born in this country and British by birth, but deserved, she deserved, according to the law, what is called safeguarding. Safeguarding is meant a legally guaranteed protection for the young people, the children, what is called the duty called the safeguarding the children duties. So when she, Shamima Begum, and her friends were aged 7, 8, 9, whatever the years were, when they began to be kind of like influenced or contacted, we don't know the facts because we don't know these girls. All we know about them is by following the published and publicly accessible, although it takes a lot of time, extra time, and research, publicly accessible sources. And we put together one, two, three, and try to create a picture as best as we can based on the available evidence that we can access. So these girls, Shamima Begum is the typical name, were being influenced by the criminals, whatever the criminals were, whoever was brainwashing them, grooming them, wherever they were not protected by Tower Hamlets Council, which legally owed that duty to protect these children. So you extrapolate again and go to all those councils in and across Yorkshire where most of the grooming took place, and you can find the same example. The Pakistani origin councillors, the Pakistani origin local politicos were lying as they were denying knowledge that they had. The knowledge they had that these criminals were targeting these children and they were raping these white girls, sexually exploiting them, and so on. Again, these white girls, most of them, not all of them, came from similar economic and social backgrounds, deprivation. So the biggest betrayal, going back to the front page of Thursday's Times newspaper, the leveling up was taking place more in the southeast than it was happening in the north. Just take it backwards a bit, like a decade or even 20 years. And there was this denial, the denial of the fact that deprivation seriously affected and impacted on the lives of these children's families, parents. And to this day, we say exclusively. I mean, Ken Leach is noted for his Kathy Come Home documentary, but here you are watching the Khoodeelaar campaign television channel on the internet. And we assert exclusively, confidently, factually, morally, ethically, that there has been no Kathy Come Home to cover the plight of these children, the white girls that were being sacrificed to the gangs of Pakistani born criminals with the collusion of the Pakistani born politicos across Yorkshire and with the complicity of the white Labour Party criminals that thought that was wonderful arrangement because nobody could blame them for being anti Pakistani. And the police enjoyed it to such an extent that the police, in many of the instances, were reported by the victims. The police joined the taunting, the attacks on the character of some of the victims, or a lot of the victims. How dare Jeremy Ebilson and others of his ilk, such as Rod Little the criminal, say that wokes have prevented action from being taken against these criminals. Our campaign is consistently ahead by decades on the evidence. And we haven't just started now, we have been saying it for decades. Our movement has been saying it for decades. The local councils are corrupt to the core because they are not accountable. That meant that most of the local areas, that most of the people from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and significant numbers of Indians, not all of the Indians, because the Indians demographically are markedly different in terms of economic locations. Not very much, but they are. Birmingham as well. We have been saying that local councils are corrupt, and we have been saying that by installing this grant making mechanism, which is where we come back to the leveling up and the report by Sam Coates, as broadcast on the Sky News during Thursday, the 19th of January 2023. So, if David Aranovich, son of Sam Aranovich, the academic, fancies himself a confrontation with us on the facts, bring it on, David Aranovich. Because discovered when we discovered that he had taken up a job with the Times, or no, the BBC, it wasn't the Times. He took up a job with the BBC, and we rang him. And we said that he was lying because he was supposed to be telling the truth from the perspective of his communist affiliations. And Aranovich, in case he didn't know who called him, it was me. Aranovich said that my accusation against him constituted his word a slur. I did not make any slur. And since that time, for decades, Aranovich has been peddling packaged lies. Like his column in the Sunday, in the Times on Thursday the 19th ends with a hint at the liar Keir Starmer. He says that a government which is prepared to fund the various services is what is needed. What he's saying that Keir Starmer, he can't wait for Keir Starmer to head the government, next government in Britain. Whatever it is, Aranovich is not critical of the Metropolitan Police. Aranovich doesn't even mention the court system. Aranovich doesn't mention even the licensed law traders. And within the licensed law traders associations, like for example the Soul Cheaters, have got a thing called Solicitors Regulation Authority. These are bogus regulators. They are not regulating the licensed law trading soul cheaters. Same case with the Bar Council and whatever. These people are not regulating the licensed law trading barristers. And it goes on. As we have said extensively in the last 3-4 years about the first president of the Supreme Court, David Neuberger. Neuberger is pronounced Neuberger, but it is spelled Neuberger. So it's like new burger, but pronounced Neuberger, as I understand the pronunciation. And these are the people that are, let's say, the icons, the names, the celebrities, the so-called influencers. These are bad influences, satanic influences. None of these voices have been standing up for baby angel Geronimo against the evilness called DEFRA. The evilness called DEFRA's chief bat, evilness called Christian evilness. So it's not just Cinderella, so-called regulators, but all the agencies in the country, in the United Kingdom, are in denial. And they're perpetrating the disequilibrium. They're perpetrating the disparity. They're perpetrating the discriminatory kind of relationship between the controllers of the power and the majority of the people who are controlled and are subjected to lack of say, lack of protection. If the police, any number of police, it doesn't have to be a minimum number of police that are found to be breaking the law by logic, by mathematics, by rationality. If the police are found to be breaking the law, then the police system is broken and it needs replacing. From the fall of Scotland Yard in the 1960s, that the Times newspaper mainly reported on, 60s, fall of Scotland in the 60s, it's more than 60 years. And none of the Fleet Street media, none of the BBC, Sky, whatever has come into being, Sky didn't exist in the 1960s, but ever since the Sky began broadcasting after Murdoch launched it, or Channel 4 when it began broadcasting at the beginning of the 1980s, none of them has investigated the police. Now, the police are unique in terms of possessing power, power at common law, and power by convention and power by consent that is presumed to be present in the population. For example, when Sarah Everard was stopped by the, how can you describe him? You can't even call him monster. So call the evilness Wayne Cousins. Although there is no transcript of any conversation between her and this evilness, as far as I'm concerned, I've seen no transcript, I have not seen any similar construction. Let's imagine from the ordinary common observations in society. When a young woman, by all descriptions, she was an attractive young person who would have attracted ordinarily anyone's attention to her personal appearances. When she's approached, as she was approached, what would she say in response? She would not challenge anyone who was claiming to be a policeman. She would not challenge their authority. Now that is something that has been overdue for change for decades. Because people in the ordinary kind of population, in the ordinary demography, look at a police person or appear to be faced with a police person who claims to be a police person. They don't challenge. They don't challenge the legal authority of that particular police person. That is what must have happened with Sarah Everard. Because according to Jason Farrell's quotation of this regulator about this particular woman that he spoke to, the regulator said that the phrase reluctant consent, the phrase was used, reluctant consent. The woman said it's disgusting. There is no such thing as reluctant consent. And that same regulator said that she could have pushed him. She could have said no. How could any regulator actually construct such a scenario? In the street, the encounter is happening, the interaction is happening between the individual who is always on their own when police confront them and the police. How is that individual supposed to confront and challenge and say no to, and dismiss anything that the policeman is saying. It is often the policemen, there are police women, but their number is smaller than the number of policemen that abuse members of the public. Under that kind of tradition, which is dangerous tradition, and it needs to be replaced, changed, completely scrapped. So Sarah Everard, who was stopped, and then obviously she was kidnapped, and then she was raped, and then she was burned. How do you begin to describe that? How do you begin to look at that scenario? And that is happening in Britain. And after all of that, the other police people who were kind of supposed to be guarding the vigil, the scene of the vigil that took place in solidarity with Sarah Everard, those police people attacked the vigil participant women. These were not, in the main, these were not black women or Asian women. These are mainly white women like Patsy Stevenson. Patsy Stevenson was the one who was pushed to the ground by the police and physically assaulted. And then afterwards, she was sent. She was sent a series of taunting messages by other police. Now, where were these people like David Aranovich when all of these things were happening? They're talking about David Carrick on the third calendar year, let's say. But when Sarah Everard was murdered, she was kidnapped, she was raped, and her body was burnt. This didn't happen under the control or initiative of anyone who could be called a terrorist, could they? These are acts that are unprecedented brutality and cruelty. And there has been no reaction. There has been no reaction that actually does justice to the victims of these crimes. The original crimes against Sarah Everard and the ancillary, subsidiary crimes that took place against people who expressed solidarity with her and also expressed the demand that life for women in Britain should be made safer on the streets. In the clamor about the Metropolitan Police, the main thing that has happened in the exchanges, in the quotations, in the reports, it hasn't been focusing on the fundamental sexist danger that exists on the streets of London, in the streets of the UK, for women and girls, and in the system. Now, if you then translate and transfer the image of the women to Asian women, African women, and to make it even worse, Pakistani women or Muslim women, then their experience on the streets are any number of times worse. Whether they're of any background, women are not safe in this country from the behavior of men that are in positions of power. And those men who are in positions of power are not just men in the uniforms, in the police, but in the institutions, in the streets, and in the culture. Where is the debate about all of that? So we say that that has to be debated as to how soon that can be changed, not debated as to whether change is necessary, but how soon. And Starmer is not leading the debate, is he? Yvette Cooper is not leading the debate, is she? None of the Labour Party frontbenchers is debating that. Where is the evidence that David Aranovich cares about the fact that this is not happening, this debate is not happening? Going back to the role of the corrupt councils in controlling the local demography, local population, local electors, we started campaigning in the like the 70s against Tower Hamlets councils kind of connections with, in the context of Brick Lane, in reference to Brick Lane, taking as a case example, reliable case example. We noticed that when the Sunday Times magazine published the attack, The World Beyond the Curtains, in the Sunday Times magazine dated the 2nd of December 1973. Now 73, 83, 93, 2003, 13, 60 years ago, calendar years ago. For 60 calendar years since the Sunday Times magazine published that attack on the Silotis, the Muslims, the Bangladeshis in Brick Lane area, the Labour Party has been silent. The Bangladeshi members of the Labour Party has been silent. The Bangladeshi entrepreneurs who are running Tower Hamlets linked, ethnicity linked media outlets have been silent, have been in denial. Now, that has been an attack piece in the Sunday Times in December 1973 that had more wider spread of ingredients affecting more aspects of the life and culture and history and so on of the Bangladeshis, the Silotis, and the people, Bangladeshi, Silotis, Muslims resident in Brick Lane and the rest of the neighborhoods. More aspects have been covered in that attack piece than any single act of attack on the what is called retrospectively the Bengalis in the context of say the narrative about the language movement of 1952, as they say. There was one off the cuff remark by Muhammad Ali Jinnah who said that Urdu and Urdu alone would be the national language of Pakistan at the time when he spoke in the late 1940s. This was not a policy statement by the government of Pakistan. This was an opinion. It was an objectionable opinion because he didn't recognize the people of other languages and he didn't give the constitutional option. That is the objection. But the fact that he said that did not amount to a law. Number one. Number two is that the shooting that took place on the 21st of February 1952 in Dhaka, capital of East Pakistan, that was neither ordered by Jinnah nor was it sanctioned by the cabinet, the East Pakistan government. It was ordered by a politician in power who was not from West Pakistan. Okay? But that event, or those two events, have been misinterpreted to say that this was the beginning of the liberation war against Pakistan. How could that be? The man who ordered the shooting, the people who shot the three or four students, were all Bengalis or from East Pakistan. So, what kind of liberation or freedom against them was supposed to be taking place? And there wasn't a freedom, liberation movement in evidence up to the day after the 16th of December 1971. After the 16th of December 1971, all kind of mythologies began to be made and asserted about how the so-called freedom movement had been created. And the main thing that was asserted was the language movement. Now, the language is not English. Bengali is not English, is it? And this day, the day marking the so-called martyrdom of the campaigners for Bengali language rights, is not the Bangla calendar. Think about that. It's the English calendar. 21st February is observed, not the 8th of Falgun, which is when the Bengali calendar date was when the shooting took place. 8th Falgun. So how stupid do these criminals manufacturing this distortion think the ordinary people are? In any case, the so-called campaigners for Bengali rights or Bengali language rights don't have respect for Bengali speaking people. Set aside the other languages in Bangladesh now, because Bangladesh, in my theory, is a linguistic federation as well as it is a religious federation, as well as it is an ethnic federation. There is not one single ethnicity that makes Bangladesh. There is not one religion that makes Bangladesh. There is not one language that makes Bangladesh. However, the numerical predominance of Bengali is there, and even if we accept that, the speakers of Bengali language at any level in the country today, which is today is the 20th of January 2003, 23. Speakers of Bangla language, let's say, in Bangladesh, are automatically reduced to a lower level of recognition, acceptance than anyone who speaks in English. That is fact. In the 1969 uprising, so-called, in Dhaka, the student union, the University of Dhaka Students' Union, used to be referred to as DAKSU as the abbreviation, was a Siloti speaker called Nazim Kamran Chowdhury. Now, Nazim Kamran Chowdhury came from the same area as I do in Silot, Gulabganj. He came from Badeshwar and I come from Sundarpur. Nazim Kamran Chowdhury was the leader of the students' movement representing the University of Dhaka students, which was the leading outfit in 1969-70, let's say. Now, what language did he speak in? Bengali? No. Nazim Kamran Chowdhury either spoke in Siloti or in English. And you can go and check the videos. So, therefore, this program, the Khoodeelaar television channel, is about ethics, about morality, about accuracy, about accountability, universality, and democracy and democratic equality. There is no other channel, there is no other program, there is no other slot that does what we do and cannot do what we do. They don't have the commitment, they don't have the information, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the principles. What we are saying is that despite the fact that there is a lot of media outlet and output, the solution to the crisis in the society that was described as sick society in the Times on Wednesday, although the contents of the piece underneath that heading didn't do justice to that heading, but the heading was absolutely spot on. To make this society better and to translate this across the world to make any society better, the following values and qualities must be established in the practice of the and the practices of the people who hold power, crave power. First of all, they have to be true to the facts and the evidence that exist in society. That means that the people's experience day to day must be truthfully acknowledged and recognized. And the resources of the population, the country, must be truthfully accounted for. For example, here we got in the United Kingdom an admission. I mean, this is an admission that is reluctantly made by the conservatives, now fronted by Rishi Sunak, that billions of pounds, billions, notice how much that is, billions of pounds were abused under the cover of COVID contracts. And where did the money go? The money went almost all of it to conservative supporters. So it's like there is nothing similar that exists anywhere in the world, except in a situation where a gang like the Guptas control the state of South Africa. The state apparatus is taken over by a family called the Guptas. The Guptas originate from the Indian Punjab, but they could originate from either part of the Punjab. But they are a criminal gang posing as business entrepreneurs. And they took over the state apparatus in South Africa. And anything went. So, in order to avoid the Guptas like takeover of the state, there has to be accepted democratic consent, an agreement among the country, among the electorate, among the population in the country concerned, every country, we are saying, starting with the United Kingdom, that those who seek elected position, political position, must be committed not to a promise, but to this, that if they tell lies, they are out of the office. And that has to be, that agreement would be various stages ahead of the social contract that we know from history, hundreds of years, Bacon and whatever. This social contract, updated contract that we are proposing, will do away with deprivation as we know it, lack of say as we know it. And it will put an end to the likes of the evilness called Boris Johnson. In her latest column for the Times, the newly appointed editor of the Spectator, which Boris Johnson edited, political editor of the Spectator magazine, or the Spectator website as it is now, Katie Balls, her comment says that whether he comes back or not, he's haunting. He's haunting the current kind of incumbent on the current people in offices in government. So Boris Johnson is an endless evilness who knows that the House of Commons, the courts and the tribunals, and the media are unwilling to stop him. So he can do whatever he likes. He can come and interfere, and he can come and disrupt, and he can come and hijack, and he can do away with any rules, any procedures, any laws. Now, there has to be a mechanism, open, transparent mechanism to put an end to this. He should be either put on trial for serial law breaking and or as a terrorist, disrupting society, threatening the peace and equilibrium that society needs to be established. There has to be that kind of open, transparent system to stop someone of the evilness of Boris Johnson. And that can be transferred to any country, any society. For example, in the case of Pakistan, where the campaign for the last few months has been fronted by Imran Khan against the corrupt, criminal, crooked status quo fronted by the Nawaz Sharif clan on the one hand, and the clan owned and controlled by the son of Benazir Bhutto and his biological father, Zardari. And in India, of course, it is a conglomerate of the extreme far right fascists posing as a kind of federation of right wing outlets. But the Indian conglomerates being allowed to function because the courts in the Indian Union, the Central Supreme Court and the court system locally, have been rendered lifeless. They are being used as tools of the fascist conglomerate. Now, that cannot be allowed to happen because hundreds of millions of Indians are being kept in desperate poverty and disenfranchised, states of disenfranchisement. In Pakistan, any number of people are being kept in poverty, denied rights, and in Bangladesh, the situation is far worse than can be described. And this is only a tip of the iceberg because there are other countries across the world that have got people, very small number of people in control of positions of power in the state, across the state, and in businesses, etc., who are robbing the rest of the population without any say. And the fact that there is a United Nations organization with all its laudably named agencies does not make any difference to the fact that the founding aims and purposes of the United Nations have been squandered, have been denied by the serial carriers that are usurping the positions, occupying the positions in the United Nations and its tributary agencies. And you look at the factor of Ukraine that is being used and abused and hyped up in order to create the dissension, create the tension, and create the kind of violations of millions of people across Europe and having impact on the rest of the world. There is no intervention by the United Nations at all because the United Nations is a shell. It's not live. The live United Nations would have existed had they not allowed the murder of the Swedish Secretary General of the United Nations, Shamash, Hammarskjöld. There has been no Secretary General after Hammarskjöld's assassination that has actually stood up for the founding values of the United Nations. So the population of the world, as well as the planet itself, are being destroyed, are at risk of destruction. And to save the humanity and save the planet, all the criminal regimes must be got away with, done away with. And democracy, ethics, morality, accountability, transparency, and equality must be established. We have got other items in the updates, but we are not going to go into those, including, as we said at the beginning, update on Jacinda Ardern and updates locally about Tar Hamlets, Newham, and about Bangladesh and about Brick Lane. We shall be continuing in the editions that will follow whenever they are. This is now 1 hour, 12 minutes, and about 50 seconds by the time we close this program.